All right, so today's agenda here, just a little welcome. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what today's meeting is about and kind of position within the other meeting, so everybody has a sense of what's coming and how today fits into that. As a, it's a technically a public meeting, so I want to open up for public comments, give a couple minutes for that. If there are any members of the public that are not on the planning team, give them an opportunity to share anything. The discussion timeframes later on are for the planning team members. So that's why I want to make sure we have public comment space. So we'll make that available. And then I'm going to do a little review. On Friday, we issued a number of our baseline documents. The vulnerability assessment is yet pending, but that will be out shortly. But all of our other baseline documents we've released. We don't expect you to everybody to read through all of those documents. You're totally welcome to do so, of course. The baseline summary document, the baseline and draft strategic goals, we are hoping that you, if you have not yet, that you do here after this meeting, review your sections at least. That will be great to kind of give everybody a central place to start from. But I'm going to do a high-level review of all the documents so you know what's in them. So if you don't have a chance to review them, you'll get a high-level review, and then you can choose to dig in as deeply as you want on any of those documents. We're going to take a bio break then, and then 2/3 of our meeting really is going to be about breakout sessions. So we're going to break into our sub-teams. We have 3 rounds, so everybody will have 3 sub-teams that they're involved in. Hopefully everybody has signed up for their sub-teams on the sub-team sign-up. If you have not had a chance to do that, you do not need to worry. You can sign up by just selecting which team you go into when we do breakouts, and you'll just need to let me know which team you went into. I'll try to track, but if you just let me know, then I can make sure you get up on the sub-team list. That just helps me kind of keep things organized. So that's an overview for today. I oftentimes like starting off with a quote because I am a geek. And so I thought I would share a quote with you. And that quote is, "You don't have to know the details of the science to be a part of the solution. And if you wait until you know everything, it will be too late for you to do anything. Courage is the resolve to lead without the assurance of a happy ending. We have to do something. It does not follow that we should simply settle for anything." And so just a sort of little thought-provoking quote in here as we begin the work of goal setting that will set the ground for detailed actions. And as I've indicated, I wanted to kind of give you a sense of this meeting in position with the other meetings. So we are here today at, oops, they all appeared at once. So we are here today in meeting 2B, and that is a goal setting meeting. So we're going to be talking high level goals overall, overarching goal for GHG reduction. And then in particular in the sub-teams discussion, strategic goals for each sub-team. And I'll review them in later on. We have thrown out starters, and the intention there is simply to start the conversation. They are strategic goals that we think could be good for the community, but they are not intended to be the end-all be-all. They're intended to be the beginning, just a place for the group to begin their conversation. So today is about goal setting. The next meeting that we have will actually wrap up goal setting. So we should be able to have good in-depth conversations about that and some time between the two to let it incubate. So at our next session, we're going to be looking to finalize our strategic goals, the sort of high-level strategies, the end goals that we're looking to achieve. And then in the following workshops in April and May and the timeframes between, we will then be exploring detailed actions with our goals in mind, what we're looking to accomplish. Then we're going to start looking into detailed actions, exploring existing ones as well as going through and creating our own ideas. If you can please mute everybody, that'd be great. So that's going to happen in April and May. And then in June, it's starting to coalesce now. We've got what we think our detailed actions are, and we're going to start thinking about implementation. How might those detailed actions actually happen? What kinds of resources are out there in the community that can support it? Partners, its responsibilities, etc. So that's what the next 5 meetings are going to be like. And then following that, we will be working on creating a full draft plan. And that'll come out in July for our July meeting. So that's kind of how this meeting fits in with all of that. Is there any question at that point? I just want to make sure if anybody has any questions that I can address that. Okay, all right, awesome. All right, so I just now, as I indicated, I wanted to sort of give a space for any public comments. If there are any members of the public that are not on the climate action planning team present, I don't know if there are any. And if so, if they would like to share anything. I'm scrolling through the names just to see if I see anybody, and I don't think I'm seeing anybody. I'll give it another round here. Any members from the public that would like to share any comments or statement? Okay, I'll open it up. Is there anybody on the team here that has anything that they'd like to share at the beginning? Don't have to, but just as long as we have space, I want to offer it up. Or question. Okay. All right. Okay, so it sounds like we're good. So we will move on to the next part of the agenda. And that is now talking a little bit about the existing condition documents that we've released and kind of doing a high-level review on those. And so the first thing I just want to point out that these documents are not intended to be a draft climate action plan. They are process documents. And what we mean by that is the intent of these documents is to provide as much background data and estimates as reasonably possible to assist in understanding the order of magnitude issues and potentials. The reason why we do this is that we have seen, there's a few reasons. First of all, we've seen a number of climate action plans that may have very robust goals or goals that maybe aren't robust enough. And we feel that can sometimes come about when there hasn't been enough thinking about what the existing conditions are to really kind of understand what some of the drivers might be and to give a starting point. A great example is we've seen some communities have goals for, say, renewable energy that we're totally in favor of, love renewable energy, but we've seen some goals where perhaps it may actually be not achievable or not achievable in the time frame that they offered up. So we think it's important to try to certainly be as visionary as we can be and want to be, but also understand what it might take to accomplish the visions. So we try to do as much background research, data gathering, and estimating as we can to give a place to start for the team. The second reason that, so we hope that all that gives sort of a place to help explore goals and strategies and actions. And most importantly, giving us a place, kind of a common starting place for the discussion to begin. We have a beautiful, broad team, diverse folks with lots of experience in lots of different parts of the community. And so this just gives us all a place, kind of a common language, if you will, to begin the discussion. So that's really the intent of the background documents. So they are not intended to be the answer of everything. They're really kind of the beginning of everything. So the documents that we've issued are the greenhouse gas inventory for 2020, the ground cover, tree canopy, and carbon sequestration study that looks broadly at ground cover in the community, the renewable energy potential study, And as I've indicated, the vulnerability assessment, which we've had the entire workshop actually on it a couple of weeks ago, that assessment's coming out shortly. We have some draft content that also has been issued in the next document, which is the, oops, sorry, my computer was lagging. The next document, which is the baseline assessment and strategic goal recommendations. So the purpose of this document, those first 4 documents that I talked about they're kind of lengthy. They try to dig in as deeply as they can on the topics that they cover. And we do not expect that everybody reads through them. We anticipate there probably are some people that will, because there are some folks that have that intent and that interest and the time to do so. And there are others that just, there's too many things in the day, and that's totally cool. You don't need to review all of those documents. We create then the baseline assessment and the strategic goal recommendations document, trying to be a little bit more succinct and kind of summarize those findings, those estimates, those data points, those pieces of information into a couple of pages worth of content for each section. And from that, we then are offering up, here are potential strategic goals for each sub-team. And again, the intent is just to give a starting point, not an end point. It's a place to begin, and you guys can debate what those goals are, make them different, add to them, delete them, etc. And we'll talk more about that later. So just to kind of review a little bit of our information. So looking back, La Crosse, we have seen climate change, increase in temperature, increase in precipitation, significant increase in heavy precipitation, a little bump in our days above 95. We have also seen an increase in, oh gosh darn it, I'm sorry, that says Hennepin County. I thought I corrected it. This data is actually for La Crosse County. Please forgive the typo. That's horrible. I thought I had that. But since 2001, from 2000 to 2010, there were about 405 events. In 2010 to 2020, there was an increase of storm events by about 8%. So we have seen an increase in storm events. As we look forward, oh gosh darn it, I'm sorry guys. This slide also, the name is not edited properly. The numbers are correct though. We can anticipate an increase in average temperatures of 6 to 12 degrees, an increase in the variability of precipitation, as well as a likely increase in total precipitation. We're anticipating an increase in heavy precipitation and an increase in extreme temperatures, looking at potentially up to about 50 days a year on average that could be 95 or warmer by the end of the century. Kind of looking at the diagram here, this just sort of helps illustrate, it's called the climate stripes diagram. This illustrates the average temperatures since 1895 for the state of Wisconsin. If it's blue, it's below average temperatures. If it's red, it's above average temperature. And you can see definitely kind of a red shift towards the last part of the 19th or 20th century and into the 21st century here. So we have definitely seen an increase in weather, extreme weather. As I've indicated, looking forward, we see an increase in average maximum temperatures. The red solid line is the projected average annual temperature, maximum temperatures through the end of the century. And the blue line is if we are globally successful in meeting the climate accords. The cone of color, that red cone shows the likely variability, the projected variability of maximum temperatures. And so really that's kind of the key point. A lot of people will hear, well, our projected increase in temperatures, a couple of degrees doesn't sound so bad. But what we're really talking about is also an increase in the swing of possible or likely temperatures. and the variability between those experiences. That will increase with time as our climate ends up with more and more greenhouse gases in it. It becomes more volatile of the system. And again, projecting days above 95 degrees through the end of the century. I like to think of this as kind of, La Crosse on the move. It's almost kind of visualize that as our weather increase, our temperatures increase into the future, how that is sort of like experiences that our neighbors to the south might have. And so summertime temperatures, for instance, by the middle of the century, will be similar to St. Louis. By the end of the century, it'll be similar to southern Arkansas or even northern Texas. So it's similar to picking up the city and moving it south about 12 miles a year, every year over the next 8 decades, or about 173 feet every day. So of course, those projected climate impacts have risks, vulnerabilities associated with them. The primary climate risks are the little blue icons there. So it includes extreme temperature and weather, flooding, air quality, vector-borne disease, food insecurity, water quality considerations, waterborne disease considerations, power failure. And then there's also related economic risks. So crop yield and increases or impacts to food prices, mortality considerations, energy costs, even property crime or violent crime can be impacted through extreme weather events and extreme temperature events. And of course, when it comes to climate planning, we're concerned about those vulnerabilities, and we want to address them by addressing typically those that are most vulnerable amongst us. Now, all of us have vulnerabilities to those experiences, so it isn't to say that any of us or anyone is not important. Of course, everyone's experiences are, and everyone's vulnerability wants to be addressed. Typically, we focus on the most vulnerable because within a community-wide planning, if we can help assure the most vulnerable amongst us are less vulnerable or no longer vulnerable, then the rest of us tend to also benefit from that. So kind of focusing on the vulnerable population groups is an important strategy. Sorry, there it goes. My computer is really acting slowly. I'm sorry about that. So as we kind of look at those vulnerabilities, the sort of prioritized impacts really are flooding, extreme heat and weather, air quality, food insecurity, and power failure tend to be the probably the higher ranking vulnerabilities for La Crosse. Our largest vulnerable populations are those that are in economic stress, older adults, 65 and older, and at-risk workers. So think of folks that work out and about in the weather, first responders, contractors, construction workers, folks working in warehouses and so forth, and also people of color. Those tend to be for La Crosse, the sort of prioritized potential impacts and the most vulnerable, the largest vulnerable populations in the community. So moving into our greenhouse gas inventory. So we've talked a little bit about sort of vulnerability. Now we're just going to touch on our contributions to climate change and what we can do to mitigate that. So our greenhouse gas inventory, we did 2020, and we also reevaluated 2019. Our total emissions for 2020 were just a tidge over 667,000 metric tons. That is a fair bit less than 2019 by about 108,000 metric tons. Those biggest reductions, frankly, came about in 2 sectors. The first sector is our energy sector. Our electricity continues to get cleaner. And Excel reported a pretty nice bump between 2019 and 2020 in their emissions factors. So that's a fantastic progress. The other is in our transportation sector. There was a drop in the total community-wide estimated vehicle miles driven, which of course we anticipate is probably largely due, or if not entirely due, to the pandemic. So some of that reduction is a reduction that should stay with us. So our energy sector, our electricity sector, a cleaner grid, that should continue to stay with us. The VMT reduction, probably not. And I see Charlie has a hand raised. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah. Hey, Ted. Is this a time to ask questions? Or
absolutely. You guys can have at it.
All right. So the energy side, you see a decent drop, 14% in emissions, and a big part of that you said came from energy. And then you referenced the utility grid getting cleaner, which is great. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we used less energy. Do you have those numbers? Did we consume about the same, and all the savings came from the grid?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have that right in my head. It is in the report. My recollection was that the raw consumption numbers were similar. It may have nudged up a tidge, but raw consumption, I think, was similar. It was definitely, though, in the emissions factor. So it isn't. So that reduction wasn't necessarily through a reduction in our consumption. It was in an increase in the cleanliness of what we're consuming.
Right. So it wasn't necessarily anything the city did. It was what Excel did.
Yeah. And I see, looks like Kathy has a raised hand.
Yeah, this may be answered in the report and I didn't understand it or I missed it, but you know, we have the trash burner that generates electricity from burning plastic and waste. And I'm not sure if that, because I don't know how that's counted, whether it's a county thing or a city thing, or if that was at all included in greenhouse gas emissions figures. Thank you.
That's a great question, and the answer is yes, it is. It does not show up in the energy sector, though. It shows up in the waste sector. The theory being that it's waste that's the community share of the waste that goes. We collect so much waste as a community, we generate so much waste as a community. Where that goes is how we account the emissions associated with it. And so there is emissions associated with an RDF facility, a refuse-derived fuel facility like that, an incinerator. The emissions that are recorded relate to greenhouse gas, not other air emission considerations. As a GHG inventory, we're focused entirely on greenhouse gas, but it is accounted for. Awesome questions. Great. Thanks, guys. So this just shows, this little donut down here shows the kind of breakdown that our, our energy sector, which is, electricity and the fuels that we're using to keep warm, basically. It accounts for about 60% of our community-wide emissions. Transportation, which does include the airport and private and community-owned vehicles, so roads out on the streets, account for about 34%. Solid waste, which does include the RDF, the waste incinerator facility, is about just a hair under 5%. And then water and wastewater is just at 0.5%. And so the water and wastewater really that, is largely related to the energy consumption associated with those sectors. So the greenhouse gas inventory also, we do just a high level comparison against other communities. Of course, we don't want to get in a competition with everybody else, but it's always nice to know, well, where do we rest in this? The way we do a comparison is to summarize our emissions on a per capita basis, so a per person basis. It helps us to, create a relationship with cities that are much larger or smaller than La Crosse is. And so this chart here shows if they have a green arrow, it means they have a lower per capita emission than La Crosse. If they have a red arrow, it means that they have a higher per capita emission than La Crosse. You can see, so we've got a number here in the Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois area, as well as throughout the central states and up into the northeast states. And across those, La Crosse is pretty much in the center. So you're pretty much right dead center on emissions per capita. Oh, and I see it looks like Mark raised your hand.
Yes, hi, Chad. Referring back to your prior, when you mentioned that part of transportation was the airport, does that include the emissions from the flights that come in and out, or how was that tabulated?
That's a great question. So it is based on the fuel consumptions that the airport has records on. So which does include aviation gas and jet fuel. So presumably, if I fly into La Crosse and then my plane's going to fly back out in an hour, they're fueling up. And so it's accounting for the La Crosse share of that exchange with the other airport. So it does include fuel consumption from the aircraft themselves, at least those that the airport has records of.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. So we also did, in addition to the workup of the emissions per sector, we've also done a what we call a business as usual projection. And so the point of a business as usual emissions forecast is to get a sense as to where might our trends be aiming if we were to not do anything. If we were just to let ride those commitments that are out there already, those dynamics that are that we think are going to continue, what might our emissions look like in the next 5, 10, 20 years? And so this business as usual forecast projects the emissions out through 2050. The yellow stuff here is electricity, and you can see that those actually taper off to 0 by 2050. That is because Excel has a commitment to reach carbon neutrality. And frankly, they've done a really good job so far. So hopefully they continue that. The blue stuff here is natural gas consumption. And that it's a little hard to see on that wedge diagram because it drops, but it actually is increasing. Their share of the total footprint is going up a little bit. And that's due in large part to population projections and a little bit related to weatherization. So those numbers are actually, we're taking forecasted climate projections over that time frame also and calculating heating degree days. And we do see some variation in that. Even though we're getting warmer, we're having broader swings of our weather experience. So those are in the numbers as well. Transportation sector, we anticipate vehicle miles to go up on a per capita basis. That has been the trend. It's projected as the trend throughout the Midwest and throughout the state of Wisconsin. So we do anticipate that's likely going to happen unless we do something to mitigate that. However, the emissions per mile, we anticipate to decrease due to 2 factors. Electrification, we are expecting some increase in electric vehicles, even if we don't do anything. And also increase in MPG of gas-powered vehicles. And then our solid waste and water and wastewater sectors, which can't really even see the water and wastewater sectors on the chart, but they're very small. Those are expected to increase just a bit, related basically to population growth. It's kind of a 1-for-1. So the point of doing these projections is so that we can have a sense of what might happen if we don't do anything, so that as we make plans for doing something, we can kind of calculate what are our actions and strategies going to do against our forecast. So in those sectors where we might see an increase, we want to make sure that we account for the increase that might occur, so that if we're trying to get it lower, we add in the increase before we subtract to it to make sure we try to hit our end goal. So this little blue dashed line represents the city's stated goal of reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. By the way, that also is pretty much the path that the IPC, the International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, the UN panel. That's pretty much the path that they also recommend for the globe to take in order to do all that we can to keep within 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. So that path is in line with Paris Accord goals. It looks like Charlie has raised hand.
Yeah, great chart, Ted. I really like this. In the commercial natural gas, do you have a further breakdown on where that's headed? What's the end use? Water heating, space heating, cooking?
No, that we don't have. We just don't have a good starting data. So in other words, we know how much we've been consuming, but we could estimate based on sort of average commercial energy consumption, how much might go to space heating versus process heating, et cetera. But it would be that kind of information that we would have access to right now would be kind of national average or at best regional average, but not necessarily, but not La Crosse specific. Which, you know, and La Crosse is going to be a little bit different. You've got an interesting profile. You've got a really good industrial base for a community your size. So it's probably going to be a little different from average.
Okay, yeah, I'm just thinking moving forward, if we're going to start to take action, right? That's a huge chunk to go after for electrification, especially with the grid becoming more green. But if we don't know what the end use is, it's hard to make a goal to do something against it.
It is. We can say our sort of the rule of thumb ballpark is that there's a pretty significant portion of that is related to heating. Where it's going to get wonky is in our like industrial type uses where they may be using natural gas for processing certain manufacturing.
Understood.
So in that instance, and you'll see that we do also talk a little bit about in our starting point recommendations, the idea of, hey, let's do what we can do to reduce, let's do what we can do to electrify, and where we can't electrify, let's look at fuel switch. So is there an opportunity for renewable natural gas? It's still an emission, so it still has a short-term GHG impact. But if we get it into the short carbon cycle instead of the long carbon cycle, it changes our long-term impacts.
Yep.
Okay, awesome question or point. Okay. Sorry, for some reason, there it goes. Sorry for that. It does this weird lag thing. I don't understand why. Okay, so the next report I'll summarize is the ground cover tree canopy carbon sequestration study. And hello, there we go. Okay, so that study, we're looking at trees because trees are important. We also did an assessment of impervious pavement, both darker colored, darker spectrum pavement and lighter colored pavement. So asphalt versus concrete, for instance, as well as building impervious surfaces. We looked at grass coverage, manicured lawn coverage, as well as prairie grass, wildflower, or natural grasses, as well as shrubs and tree coverage. And then, of course, water coverage. So we're looking community-wide and then summarizing what we're finding through those different coverages. Now, these are estimates. All of these are calculated through statistical averages of up to a plus or minus, less than plus or minus 2%. In fact, most of them are well below 2%. At about less than 1% plus or minus. So there's going to be some variation in it, but it gives us a good starting point. And so our community-wide tree cover, now this excludes, we have a few, I'm going to point out that we have all of these colored areas are census tracts. You can see that they extend beyond our city boundary line because we have 4 census tracts that have portions of the city in them and then extend beyond that property. So we actually did the assessment for all of those tracts completely, the entire tract. But in terms of our calculations here, you'll see that we are then excluding those tracts So we're trying to zero in on in-boundary conditions. So if we include all of those census tracts, those numbers, the number of tree canopy coverage is going to go up, but just so that you know. So we've got about 30% tree canopy cover, just a little over 27% lawn and grass coverage. We've got about 11% water coverage, 5% light colored impervious surfaces. So now light colored is important because the lighter colored impervious surfaces still have impacts on water runoff, but light that strikes them is going to not be absorbed. It's going to be emitted back out, which means that those surfaces don't heat up and they don't contribute the same to heat island or micro heat island experiences. So we're at about 5% of our total surface area is light impervious surfaces, and almost 27% is dark impervious surfaces. So now those impervious surfaces are both buildings and paving. We've got those broken out. And the dark impervious surfaces, of course, they absorb the heat, they radiate the heat back out, and they contribute to the experience of micro heat island or heat island impacts. So heat island, for those of you that may not have heard that term before, an urban area or even a micro area can experience increased temperatures in the summer due to conditions of impervious surface, lack of tree cover, etc. So just imagine, for instance, it's a July day, it's 93 degrees out, really hot day, and you're at a, someplace with a huge parking lot and no trees around, and you're walking across the parking lot, and that experience of heat versus if you were walking across a park that has tree cover and shade and shadow and so forth. That's kind of the experience of it. Heat island can actually then, it literally raises the temperature. So not just our experience, but it raises the temperature, and it can increase nighttime temperatures. So for all of those reasons, thinking of heat island impact is very important and looking to address it. So with the data that we generated on those different coverages, we can estimate information like energy savings for electric and natural gas. Think of trees. If you've got great tree cover around your home, you will save on cooling in the summer months, for instance. So we can estimate those impacts and do it on a census tract by census tract basis. We can also estimate heat island impact citywide. We have about a 4.5 degree heat island impact due to the combination of tree and impervious surface cover, dark impervious surface cover. And we can break that down on a census tract by census tract basis. From those, we can estimate economic benefit from our trees. So pollution absorption has an economic benefit. The energy savings that I talked about has an economic benefit, and we can calculate those on a census tract by census tract basis and the total value. So our trees give us about 2.5 million in economic benefit, and I'm sorry, that says trees, but that's actually grasses. Our grasses give us about 1.2 million in pollution absorption, carbon pollution absorption, and others. So our total tree benefit, including energy and so forth, on a per acre basis, the average citywide is about 360, but we have variation throughout our community, of course. So this helps us understand where are we getting the greatest economic benefit for our community, and where might we be getting lesser economic benefit in our community, which can kind of help be a part of how we think about how we deal with trees moving forward, or impervious surfaces moving forward. We also then break that down on a per household basis. So on average, the benefits from our trees give us about $220 per household in annual economic benefit. And of course, there is variation on that, and that chart helps to illustrate how that breaks down. We then, because we have done all of this assessment on a census tract by census tract basis, we can also break down each census tract in terms of its coverage of trees, that's the darker green. It's coverage of grasses, the lighter green. It's coverage of water, which is the blue. It's coverage of light impervious surfaces, which is the yellow, and it's coverage of dark impervious surfaces, which is that gray. And then we've taken all of our census tracts and we have simply organized them from those with the highest count of low income households, according to the US Census data, to those census tracts with the fewest low income community members in them. And you can see that there's some trend lines where the amount of tree cover tends to increase as our share of low income reduces, as well as the amount of impervious surfaces in general, and dark impervious surfaces particularly also tends to decrease as low income shares reduce. That is not something new with La Crosse. We do this with every community we work with, and we have yet to see one that doesn't have that. So it's not something for La Crosse to feel shame over. This happens everywhere. So, but it gives us an opportunity to think about how might we address that. So with all of that, we've gone through different ways of projecting out where increased tree coverage might do the greatest benefit. That relates to both how much space is there for trees. I mean, if an area already is covered with trees and we don't have a lot of opportunity for trees, you're probably not going to be able to increase it by much, right? But if you have an area that's got tons of space for trees, it might be a great target just in terms of physical capacity. We also base it on economic stress. So dealing with this sort of observation, how might we work towards addressing that? So that is a factor that we've included in the calculation, as well as we then project out growth rates and mortality rates, so that as we're talking about how we might increase tree coverage, we also want to anticipate where we're potentially losing trees because trees die. We have emerald ash borer, for instance, and other things that we just have mortality on. And also projecting, well, where our canopy is going to continue to grow, we have trees, they're growing, how do we anticipate that? And so we've done that on a census tract by census tract basis. And then based on those formulas, which are outlined in the report, we've just identified how might we prioritize tree planting and increased tree canopy growth on a census tract by census tract basis based on this data. And then we've established a starter goal. You guys can have any goal that you think is appropriate, but our starter goal says that we're trying to move from 30% coverage today to 32.5% coverage by 2030 to 35% plus by 2040. And to do so, we would need to be we'd need to see about 6,000 trees planted a year in order to hit those numbers as an estimate. Right, and it looks like Kathy maybe has a hand raised.
I know that we're mostly focusing on trees, but in this section, you also talk about lawns and prairies, and you mentioned gardens. And I'm wondering, because gardens are mentioned in another section too, how an increase in, I'm not talking about little dinky gardens, but I'm talking about big community gardens might, like where would they fall in the hierarchy of trees down to lawns as far as carbon capture or beneficial effects? Thank you.
That's a great question. I'll say that there's been an awful lot of research related to green growy stuff and their carbon capture and sequestration. And I will also say that there's a fair bit of variation on the science, and it isn't because the science isn't straightforward. It's just, it's very nuanced because it depends on the soil types. It depends on the overall exposure from one piece of property to the next. And also soil has a certain capacity for carbon, and then once you reach it, it's going to start tapering off. So there's a lot of factors in it. But what I will say is that when you kind of, just on average, when you look at the studies, prairie grasses can sequester as much carbon as forests in some instances. Typically, however, though, forests, especially in the Midwest, are going to tend to they're going to outweigh prairie grass to a degree. But both of those are pretty heavy-hitting carbon sequestration strategies. When we get into other ground covers like manicured lawns or food gardens and things like that, there's also permaculture. So permaculture is going to be, where we have food producing plants that are designed to be permanent and sort of function, like as a food forest kind of a thing. That will be closer to prairie grass and forest or tree sequestration, because we're not giving a lot of inputs every year. We're not mowing it. We're not, using farm equipment and expending fossil fuel energy to tend to it. Not that farms are important, so I'm not trying to diss farms. But from a carbon sequestration, that'll be similar. When we start looking at then lawns versus gardens that we're tending, like my backyard garden where we plant tomatoes and so forth. The backyard garden is going to tend to sequester a little bit more than a lawn, but how you manage your lawn has a big impact. If you are using a lot of synthetic pesticides and things like that, and if you mow it to 1.5 inches, are you using electric mower? Are you using gas mower? All those things have input considerations to it. So if you maintain your lawn in a low carbon perspective, that can be close to like a backyard garden, depending on what your habits are, what your maintenance habits are. So we tend to, we project carbon, we have projections for carbon sequestration. We tend to do it at the level of trees because the science is much more solid and there's less nuance in terms of maintenance and management behaviors. But when we get into grasses and food production, the behavior spectrum is very large, which means its ability to impact sequestration is very large also. So with that, okay. As I indicated, we were able to break down those impacts for ground cover by community. And another interesting sort of statistic or understanding is that in terms of our impervious surfaces, so this donut is all of our impervious surfaces, all the stuff that rain's going to roll off of. Out of those surfaces, 67% of them in the community is dark pavement. 6.6% is lighter colored pavement, 20% is dark building, and about 6% is light colored building. So what that tells you is that there's some opportunities there. If we're looking to reduce our heat island impacts, clearly an opportunity to focus on our dark pavement could do a lot. So that means either reducing our amount of pavement. It can also mean making dark pavement not dark pavement, making it a cool pavement. It can mean interspersing green components in it. So we're reducing down the amount of impervious, putting some tree canopies on it, et cetera. And within our building sector, the same sort of strategy, looking towards what can we do to make our darker rooftops not dark. So that could mean, a cool roof, or it could mean green roof strategies. So we can see that in terms of a heat island impact, we have some opportunities to focus in on some actions. In terms of our grasses coverage, over 90% of our grasses coverage in the city is lawn, manicured lawns. And there's, not manicure, I'm not going to kill lawns, but it is an opportunity for us to explore where might we convert turf to non-turf so that we're not mowing it. We don't have to put additives into it. We can increase carbon sequestration by going to like a prairie grass, prairie flower, or permaculture to increase food production, et cetera. As I've indicated, I already covered this. We did kind of put together a weighted projection. And again, please keep in mind that is just intended as a starting point for the conversation. So if you think the intention is that if you think the tree canopy coverage should be X% instead of Y%, we're trying to give you a sense of order of magnitude. Well, we've mapped out to get to about 30%, or excuse me, 32.5% by 2030. And given average assumptions related to growth rate, mortality rates, and a new tree crown of about 5 feet, then to reach that, we'd have to plant about 6,000 trees collectively throughout the city. So it just gives you a place to start. If you want to double that number, then you know that you're going to double the tree plantings. So that's our intention here, is to map something out so that we can make decisions together based on some sort of a shared understanding. So we also did a renewable energy potential study. Same reason, we're just trying to get a good sense of renewable potential. Just a little bit of, we've got a little bit of information related to renewables in the state, kind of statewide jobs, number of employers, where they exist, total number of arrays throughout the state, or total installed capacity. And then we look at information on La Crosse. And I will say that our La Crosse specific information is a little weak. We don't have good database. So that actually is a good opportunity for us to think about how we might improve that. For instance, permitting processes for solar arrays where we track the year they go in, how large they are, what their production projections are. That can help us in moving into the future and increasing our knowledge of what has been installed. But based on the information that we do have, we can see our trends. So basically in terms of our number of solar installations in the community, it looks like we're edging out the state average in terms of number of installations on a per capita basis. In terms of average solar installations per 1,000 households, we also are edging out the state average. In terms of our capacity, the amount of megawatt hours generating capacity, we're a little under our per capita average. So that means that the arrays that we're getting in place are tending towards a little bit smaller than state average. That's not too surprising because if we get onto rural areas, we might have larger arrays that are like community solar or utility scale solar. But it does give us an area to think about. We can look to grow solar by trying to keep our pace the same number of arrays going in each year, but looking to figure out how can we make the arrays that we're putting in bigger, attract folks that are interested in larger arrays, for instance. And I see Charlie has a hand up.
Yeah, Ted, question for you. Can you talk to the balance you've seen working with other communities? If our long-term goal is 2050, what is the balance between when we know that the utility is going to be 100% carbon-free electricity? Why would we invest, or what are the advantages of investing in solar infrastructure? And maybe it's just short-term gains or perceived short-term gains compared to just waiting for the utility to do it, and then we could invest in other things like advanced energy efficiency or an electric fleet compared to investing in solar panels. Just interested in your
yeah. That's a great question. And the prioritization, I mean, what you point out is actually a good one, and it's a good conversation. My short answer is kind of all of the above continue to be important. It may, as you think about your greenhouse gas emissions projections, though, it does start identifying where are the tougher changes, the changes that need the most attention, that may be the hardest lift. And so, addressing our heating fuel emissions and addressing our transportation emissions are the two heavy lift sectors that the projections, as we can see right now, don't show enough evolution in those to really get us there. So those are pretty heavy lifts. Those are important focus areas. I will say, though, that distributed renewable has other advantages. In this report, which I may have summarized, I did not summarize, sorry. But in this report, we do also talk about energy poverty. And so renewable, distributed renewable energy, solar in particular, there are strategies where you can use that as a mechanism for reducing energy costs, certainly through strategies like community solar, but also programs that help get solar in the hands, ownership hands of low-income family members that can increase resilience and long-term economic stability. So there's advantages from that perspective. And also distributed energy sources can help us increase resilience in a community, and incorporating that with other strategies like microgrid, for instance, where we're starting to tie together different clean energy sources to increase resilience of key resources in our community. So there's other co-benefits of considering distributed renewables. But when you are looking at just purely a GHG inventory perspective, you are right that if you did not address solar, as long as Excel continues on their path, our electricity will reach the goal that the city has by 2050. But again, there's co-benefits to consider. So this renewable energy study, we also then projected out potential total capacity for rooftop solar, looking at an estimate of all of the roof planes throughout the community at different orientations and sizes, and then calculating capacities for each of those. And that gave us then total potential capacity. We then looked at 3 different scenarios for now what we call market absorption. Okay, so just because I can get solar on a roof plane that's going to produce electricity and would be financially beneficial, if not at least breaking even, that doesn't tell me that I'm going to put it on my roof, right? So not everybody's going to put solar on their roof just because they can. So we've then mapped out 3 different scenarios of potential absorption rates based on statewide information to date on La Crosse, as well as projecting into the future what the state projections are and what kind of share might La Crosse have. So there's a couple different scenarios there. We also projected out an illustration of potential carport arrays and ground mounted arrays, and just illustrating how much of the city's electricity could be generated by rooftop solar, carport, or ground mounted arrays under those scenarios. And again, the intention here is not to say that 5% in renewable energy is all that's possible, but to show if we want to achieve 5%, this is what it's going to take. We need so many houses with solar, or so many businesses putting on solar every year, and we're going to need so many acres of ground mount or carport, or a mixture thereof. So the intention is to map out enough information so that as we start talking about, if we talk about renewable goals, we have a place to understand what that means. We also did a projection for increasing waste to energy, but in this instance, we did it for plasma gasification. Plasma gasification does not have any emission. It is not an incineration. The reaction takes place in a fully contained reaction chamber that does not communicate with the outside atmosphere. And what happens basically, I think of it as like phase change. It becomes superheated. The waste that is inside transforms through the heated process and becomes one of 2 products. The first product is a syngas, which you can think of it as like a natural gas sort of material. That syngas can be transformed into diesel gas. It can be turned into ammonia or fertilizers. It can be turned into hydrogen. So it can become a fuel source for vehicles, or it can become a fuel source for building heating or process heating, a replacement for natural gas. So we've just done a projection for that based on our current waste streams. And the projections are, we can generate probably 25 million kilowatt hours of electricity, or about 1.7 million pounds of hydrogen fuel, or about 460,000 gallons of biodiesel, which, by the way, that biodiesel is roughly 2 times what the city of La Crosse fleet currently consumes. So it could knock off any diesel consumption that we just can't turn to electric or some other alternative fuel. Okay. So as I indicated, we've summarized all of this information, and I'm sorry I went a little slow through this, so I'm going to try to speed up just a tidge. We've summarized all this into the baseline document. You do not need to go through those other documents. I totally invite you to do so if you're interested and have the time. But if you can, please go through this document, the baseline document, if you haven't done so already, for your 3 sub-teams. You can feel free to go through all of them, but at least if you can touch your 3 sub-teams, that would be fantastic. And the introduction. The introduction's brief. Basically, this document summarizes some of our findings, some of the information that's out there, and then we recommend potential pathways towards meeting the city's goal. And those pathways include reduction, fuel switching, sequestration in some instance, and then of course adaptation considerations. And we've mapped out those potential strategic goals. Again, it's a starting point intended to give the team a place to start the conversation. But based on those suggestions that are in the document, we've then done a preliminary model for how much greenhouse gas reduction is possible. And it summarizes for each sector the total reductions between now and 2030 that can happen. So I point that out because as you consider the starting point suggestions, if the team has other ideas, you want to change them, you want to add, you want to delete, that's beautiful. I totally encourage you to do that. I just want you to keep in mind that we've modeled that. So if you, for instance, think, that's too aggressive, that's going too far, we think that needs to be a different number. I do not discourage you from coming to those conclusions. I just want you to understand that if we decrease a goal, for instance, then that sector's share of reductions will also decrease. And so that means that we may or may not be able to meet a particular overarching goal. Likewise, if we push something further, we say, no, Ted's being too wimpy here. We think that should be twice what he's saying. And we understand what it will take to do that. We think it needs to be twice. Then that means that sector will increase its reductions and increase our ability to meet our goals. So out of that, basically the reductions that these suggestions add up to is a 40% reduction in GHG emissions, community-wide emissions, a 40% reduction from 2019 levels by 2030, setting us up then for a carbon neutrality by 2050. So 40% reduction between now and 2030, and that's 40% over 2019 numbers. The reason for basing it in 2019 is that actually relates to the latest recommendations from the IPCC, which I outline here. They recommend 25 to 55% by 2030 reduction. 55 is in line with keeping global warming at 1.5. 25 is in line with keeping global warming at 2 degrees. In an ideal world, I would maybe suggest 55%, but honestly, my perception as we've gone through these numbers, I think 55 might be a little over aggressive. I think 40 is going to be pretty aggressive. That isn't to say that you guys can change it though. So it's just our starting point. So that's what our breakouts are going to start talking about, is what you guys think is a good place. But so our overarching goal that we're suggesting is a 40% reduction by 2030 setting us up then to continue reducing to achieve carbon neutral by 2050. Then for each section, each sector, again, we have some overview text, a little bit of detailed information, a review of some of the impacts related to climate change and the vulnerabilities, and then a starter point here for potential strategic goals. So strategic goals related to, where appropriate, reduction or fuel switching or adaptation goals. And then where appropriate, we also break out municipal operations. So not every sector has municipal operations in it because just based on the sector, it's not necessarily done. But for instance, for buildings and transportation, we've got a fleet, we own buildings. We typically suggest having specific goals for municipal operations so that the municipality can help lead the way. And then for each of those, based on the reductions that we're suggesting, for those that have greenhouse gas emissions associated with them, we're showing how those suggestions preliminarily are modeled to reduce our emissions between now and 2030, including any that are coming from our business as usual reductions. So as we move forward, if that sector has any BAU reductions, that's included also. So you'll see how much of it is going to come out of just changes that are hopefully coming no matter what, as well as what we're trying to do. So just the intention here is to give you a starting point so that each team can talk about those strategies and discuss what you feel about them. Do you like them? Do you think they need to be half as much, twice as much? Do you think you want to change them somehow? Do you want to add some? Do you want to get rid of some? It's all in your purview to be able to have that conversation. So we've done that for each sector. And for purposes of time, I'm not going to go through them, but I definitely encourage each of you to read through the document, particularly for your sector, as well as the other sectors, so that you have a sense of what all of the sections have, if you are able to do that, but at the very least doing your own. So I will, and again, this is just to make it a little bit larger so it's a little bit easier to read. So the suggested starter goal, overarching goal, is to reduce community-wide GHG emissions by 40% below 2019 levels by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So I am going to stop sharing and we can talk a little bit about, first I'll just be quiet for a second because I've been talking way too much, and just see if there's any questions, thoughts, or comments anybody wants to share. Okay. So
I
have
a question.
Yeah.
Hey, this is say what in terms of pricing the fossil fuels, what is the rate change you're expecting for this forecast? I know the cost of fossil fuels is expected to go up quite a bit. So I'm just curious how that is expected to impact these forecasts.
So the forecasts themselves, the business as usual forecasts, are not based on rate change. So we have not incorporated that in part because we don't have super great data right now on what the projected commitments are for rates. We do have an anticipation that rates are going to go up kind of across the board. I mean, that's always the case. Electricity tends to go up about, on average, 2 to 2.5% a year. If you look at a 20-year average, that's about what it is. Natural gas is a little bit more volatile. It's quite possible that we could see natural gas reduce for a while as fuel switching strategies start to come in. There might be some pricing strategies there. At some point in time, I would expect it to go up though, just because life being what it is. But the projections themselves are based on demand expectation and not necessarily on pricing impacts. So there could be some tapering of demand based on pricing. Historically speaking, we've not seen that though. Historically speaking, we see energy consumption going up kind of period, no matter what.
Thank you. In looking at the Excel's report, looking at the breakdown per sector of fossil fuel consumption, commercial and industry is, I think, 75%. And the cost is regressive in nature. So the more they consume, the cheaper the cost per energy is. Do you anticipate that to change in the future, where the cost per unit per green global warming potential is going to be equal across sectors? Or I would imagine that would be a pretty important aspect as we go forward, and including those greenhouse costs.
Well, that's a fantastic point, and I do think the idea of carbon pricing strategies can have significant benefit here in that sector as far as encouraging low carbon alternatives. So I think you're touching on a fantastic, which could be either a detailed action or it could be a strategy. And so again, reminder, strategy is high level, it's directional, and it has an end goal percentage or a specific goal statement that we're trying to achieve. And then detailed actions are how might we implement that. And you could craft some detailed actions related to carbon pricing, or it could be a strategy specifically where there may be a few detailed actions underneath that. But that could be a specific action to address some of those issues.
Okay,
I think I see a hand up, Kathy. And I'm sorry, by the way, if I don't see a hand, please just smack me and shout out.
I just, as we're talking about this, I'm just thinking about the exponential nature of delay, and so I would think that our goals need to be seen as the bare minimums, because even I mean, a new report is coming out from the IPCC soon, and we're already seeing that predictions they made not too long ago are not right. Things are happening quicker than predicted. And so if we're not chasing like a pole in a parking lot, we're chasing a receipt that's blowing across the parking lot. And so I hope that when we're doing this, we're looking at not just meeting the minimum targets, but what can we do reasonably to really aggressively go after this. Thank you.
Good comment. Are there any other questions or comments that anybody has? So on the agenda, we have a little space for a bio break. And what I'm going to do is, while that's happening, I'm going to set up the break room. So let's take 5 minutes or so if you want to go do some jumping jacks or go walk around for a minute. But let's plan on being back here at 12:20. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the breakout rooms and then move into breakouts. Okay. Thank you. Great record. Okay, so the intent of our breakout discussions is to give the sub-team, each sub-team, an opportunity to start talking about your feelings about the potential strategic goals for that sector. And so, this is high level. Completely feel, I mean, if you have some detailed actions that you need to get off your chest right now, totally awesome. Have at it. Do that, and make sure it gets recorded on the document. But what we really want to do is we want to make sure we're focusing on the big picture right now. Because if you remember, we talked about goal setting in this meeting and then completing it at our next meeting. So that we want to kind of get in our minds, kind of what do we really want to try to accomplish for the section? What's the big picture targets that we're aiming at for this sector? And so our draft recommendations are just the starting point, but it gives you a sense of what I mean by that. And so those draft recommendations are, frankly, if I were creating the plan in a vacuum, I'd probably start there. That does not mean that's what they need to be, though. This is a community plan created collaboratively by this group and others. And so My starting point is intended just to give you a place to start a conversation, but it gives you a sense of the kind of thing that you'll want to be talking at. And so you want high level goals, and we want to get those in place now in our next meeting. And then we'll start focusing on detailed actions on how might we accomplish those goals. And by the way, the goals that when we, at the end of next meeting, when we kind of have our set of goals, they can change, right? So as we start getting into detailed actions, we may discover, that I think we're concerned about that goal. That's okay, we can change the goal. The plan's not done until the plan's done. Or we may decide, we think we can go even further. Once we start thinking about the actions really that we have available to us, let's take that goal and we can go a little bit more aggressive so that we can tweak it as we move along, but we want to establish what we're targeting at. So that's today's discussion. The first task is when we get into breakout teams, what I would like is for each breakout team to draft one or two, probably two at least, sort of sub-team coordinators. And the job description for that is very straightforward. It's just somebody who can kind of help make sure the team sort of stays on track, but you don't have to really, I usually find it doesn't take heavy facilitation. Everybody here is going to be very excited about talking about these and collaborating together, but it's just somebody who can kind of help, that's to watch the time and make sure that we're addressing what we need to focus on today. And just kind of help, and also help make sure that everybody's being heard. If you happen to notice that somebody isn't having that opportunity, to kind of just help do that. Anders and myself and Laura, we're going to be in those rooms also. I'm going to float through all of the rooms so we can help out with that. But it's just nice to have somebody in the team who can kind of be that sort of coordinator. And I say, maybe two or even three, just in case somebody can't make a meeting. So you're not the boss of the team. You don't need to worry about you're not responsible for the team. It's just an opportunity to help guide. The second thing you want to do is for the breakout round one, only for the first breakout group. So that's for water, trees, and economy. For those three groups, the first thing I suggest that you do is that overarching GHG goal that I've mapped out as a starter point suggestion, reducing citywide, community-wide emissions by 40% by 2030, setting up for carbon neutral for 2050. I would like for you to take the opportunity to just talk about that. How do you feel about that? Do you feel good? Do you think it should be something else? Just what are your feelings about that? So, take 5-10 minutes to talk about that, and then move on to the next task, and all breakouts then after this, the other two rounds, this is all the other breakouts are going to do. Because once we talk about the big goal, everybody's talked about that. The future breakouts, we don't need to do that again. So all breakouts then, what you want to do is look at the strategic goal suggestions that I've mapped out as a starter point, and ask yourself, how well do you think those potential goals fit what's appropriate for the city? Are there any changes that, hey, I like this, but I think it should be X, not Y, or I think we should add something to it, or I think we should taper that back. I mean, just what are your feelings about changing it? If you think something should be changed, do you think one of them should be eliminated, or some of them should be eliminated? I don't agree with that strategic goal. I just don't think it's something that we should be doing. You have the conversation as a team. Are there any that you think are missing? Like, hey, I think we should be addressing A, B, and C. I don't see that anywhere. I think that should be a strategic goal for us. So that's what we really want to do. And we're going to do that today. And then next meeting is going to be almost entirely breakouts to finish up that conversation. So if you don't get there today, don't panic. We're going to have a lot more time next time, actually. But this gets the conversation going, okay? I'm going to open up these documents to kind of show what they look like. In the meantime, does anybody have any questions related to that what I've just covered? Okay, so again, I've put in the chat box a link to the baseline document if you want to see the whole thing, have that available, or as well as a link to the draft feedback documents. The feedback documents you definitely want to have open. And when you click that link, it's going to take you to a Google Drive. And then you'll see one for each of the teams here lined up. And you just select your team, open that up. And what I suggest is you can all be in here at the same time. There's a couple different ways you can do this. You can have a group conversation and assign or ask somebody to be kind of the official note taker. You can also, you can have a couple people typing in here at once because it's a shared document. Both strategies are fine. Whatever is organic to your group and you feel good about is the way you should do it. And as I've said, for the first team, the idea of just kind of going through our overarching starter goal, reducing 40% by 2030, and just what are your thoughts about that? How does that feel to you? Is it a good fit? Do you think it should change? If you think it should change, what do you think the changes should be? What do you think that might want to be? Then once you've talked about that for about 10 minutes or so, then you can move into the draft strategic goal recommendations. And there might be a couple of charts here just to kind of remind you some of the summary findings that we've had or the emissions projections. And again, just how well do you think they fit the city's needs? Are there any changes you suggest? How might they improve? Should any of them be eliminated? Do you think any should be added? And so what you can do is just under each goal, under team thoughts, you just go right ahead and type in your thoughts so that they can get tracked. So again, either have somebody be the official note taker or feel free to have multiple people putting information in. Whatever is comfortable to the group is perfect. Okay. So that's what we're looking to do. Okay. And then, as I say, the second and third round breakouts will only focus on the strategic goals for their sectors. We're going to have a little less time. So we're talking about the overarching goal only in this first round. Okay. Are there any questions at all? Otherwise, I'm going to open up the teams and get us launched. Any questions? Do we feel okay? So identify a couple sort of folks that can help be kind of team coordinators, just to kind of help make sure that we're tracking, and then dive right in on these documents, reviewing overarching city goal and then the sectors. Okay. So I'm going to open up the rooms. You should all have an opportunity to select your room. And so what you want to do is the teams that you have signed up for, you just select them. If, by the way, if you don't recall your teams, I can pull that up. I'm sorry, I was going to have that as a link and I forgot to do that. If you need help getting into your room, just let me know. I can nudge people into rooms. And I am pulling up the sub-team sign up link right now. So this link is for the sub-team sign up. So if you don't remember which sub-teams you signed up for, that's the spreadsheet so you can find them. So all you have to do is just grab your room. So recording is in progress. All right, so breakout one. The groups that we have water, green space, and economy. Maybe we'll start off with water, if that's okay. Who are your team coordinators? How did you feel about the overarching goal and anything you may want to share just about your sector goals so far for observations?
So I'm Jackie. I think we kind of determined that I would just kind of be the note taker and kind of just lead through the spreadsheet that you had. For the overall arching goal, everyone had a lot of really great ideas. I think the general feeling for the entire group is that it's a good goal. We almost all feel that it could probably be more ambitious, but we'd really like to get into the actual strategies and see how truly viable that is from like a cost economic perspective or just interest from the public perspective. So that was really the overall feeling for the overall goal.
Well stated, Jackie. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Anything you want to share about your sort of sector specific conversation or observations or pointers? Maybe you found a great way to do this conversation, or just anything you may want to share. Just give you the opportunity to.
Yeah, I think the thing that we've found probably quickest, or I found most inspiring, is that everyone has a lot of really great ideas, and there almost seems like an innumerable amount of solutions that are really good opportunities that I think make the strategic goals really intuitive, like actually determining strategies. So I think even though it's easy to get caught up in those strategic ones, it is harder to stay on like the overall big picture goals. Everyone really likes to get right into the strategy. So it's very inspiring that way, but yeah, definitely
We're
easy to get stuck in the nuts and bolts.
we're get her done society.
Yeah, definitely. I got that approach.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. Okay, how about trees, ecosystem, green space team?
Yeah, hi guys, I'm Jamie, and Bob Fisher also volunteered to coordinate. So Jamie and Bob. I was also the note taker, but I did throw in some of my thoughts while we had our discussion. It kind of started out talking about, the aggressive goal, and someone made the comment of like, we want to focus on the most aggressive goal that falls within possible. And then we kind of started getting into the strategies and like, well, is this possible with the different strategic goals within it? So we really focused on like the planning of all the trees. So like, is it possible to plant 6,000 trees? Someone brought up city budget and the plan to plant all these trees. And it also was, really heavily discussed that we should maintain the old trees that we do have because they're currently there and established. And then we discussed the solar panel coverage as well. So like if we wanted to increase tree cover, we should also consider solar panel distribution along the city because that will also affect where we put solar panels. Let's see. So I did kind of, for a summary of these different thoughts, I wrote down like 4 things that like we focused on strategically for achieving this 40%. And so it was a solar potential for tree planting. So, what is the future canopy predictions? And then food forest considerations was brought up as well. So like in areas that we could put solar panels, we could put a food forest or shrubbery or prairie, and then the discussion kind of morphed into like, which ecosystem will be the best in the area. So there's growth potential for specific areas of the city. And then someone even brought up rubber use on playgrounds, which, as our playgrounds and green spaces, like that's something very much to consider, especially when our wee little ones are playing on the playground and enjoying the outdoors. So that's a quick summary. Hopefully I covered everything, but let me know chime in anybody if I missed something. Thanks.
Awesome. Superb summary. Thank you. How about, climate economy?
We didn't really have anyone established as the go-to person here, but I'll jump in. I was taking some of the notes. So
we do now.
Everyone else in the group that was there, feel free to jump in if I'm missing stuff. But really, we started off with the talk about the bigger goal, 40% below GHG emissions, 40% below 2019 levels by 2030. And overall, I think we felt like that was a pretty taking the middle of the road approach seems to make sense now, given it, and all of us want to do more than that and be more aggressive than that, but there's also political realities and getting, is it better to put out this goal of 55% and scare a whole lot of people off and not get any of it done? Or is it better to put something out there that's a little bit more politically feasible, right? And no, it's not perfect, but it's a good step in the right direction. And the more momentum you get built towards a goal, the easier it is to make that goal more and more aggressive. But we got to start somewhere with people. So we thought that 40% seemed like a pretty good number. But we also had the idea of maybe putting in the word "at least" before 40% as a way of benchmarking 40% as the minimal goal. And that's that we want to do a lot more than that. And given, who knows in 5, 6, 7 years, 10 years, where we're going to be technology wise and just political wise, right? And maybe that goal will be able to be shifted significantly higher. So just starting with the word "at least" or that phrase "at least" before 40. to sort of benchmark it a little bit. And then as far as the climate economy, we had a lot of discussion just around, well, starting just what does that, how is this going to impact GHG emissions? These goals set, what are the actual measurables that we can take a look at? So some conversation around there, but I think for me, one of the big things that came up was the idea of in all of these goals, not just the economy goals, but across all our goals, we need to expect to use more to be inclusive, right? And to use inclusivity as a framework for all of our goals. So, when we're talking about employers, like who are we actually including here? What type of employers? Which employers are going to be included in developing the plan? Is it just going to be the big people, or is it going to be lots of people, right? And small business owners, and how do we get the most diverse array of voices into the plan? And so that also got into a little bit about just demographically, how do we encourage diverse populations to stay in the area? So we can attract diverse populations here, but we have trouble keeping them here, right? And so how do we use our economy and use this plan to help attract diverse people into the area, but then help them stay here, and redefine sort of this bigger the system to be more inclusive. So that's
Excellent.
where we went.
Fantastic. Great. Well, it sounds like, and I was kind of flipping through, I was hearing great conversations, especially now, we're just starting to get our feet wet. So great start. I just put in the chat box again, just so that the links are all together in one document or one chat. The link to the feedback documents, again, it'll take you to the Google. You just select for the next group. The next grouping then is going to be our buildings and energy group, our land use and housing group, and our health and safety group. I'm going to go ahead and open up the rooms right now. And same as before, if you need help remembering what group you were in, or if you need help getting into it, just let me know. This time, you do not need to talk about overarching goals. You're just going to dig straight into the strategic goals for your sector. We already talked about that in that first group, so we're going to have a little less time this time. So you can just go straight into your sector discussion.
Hey, Ted, can I add something real quick to
Yeah.
the group? One thing we talked about too was the study may not include the actual energy that's required to produce the food that we consume here in the city. So when we look at ways to reduce energy, that may be something to consider. And the breakout of the certain types of food, considering animal-based food requires a bunch more energy and has a greater impact to the ecology than a vegan-based diet. So those are some things that we also mentioned that would be beneficial to discuss as we do outreach in the community.
Those are fantastic points. Thank you. All right, guys, and I'll go ahead and stop the recording, but if anybody has almost, awesome. So if we can just, we'll start off for kind of the download on how the conversation went with the sub-teams we'll start with the buildings and energy, if that's okay.
Hi, Ted. This is Anders. I'll talk about that. I was taking notes for the group in that section. And there's several goals here. Some of them revolve around efficiency. We have a 15% by 2030 improvement goal to consider, and then also increasing the penetration of net zero households and commercial properties in the future. And we kind of had a discussion again about, I guess it's sort of philosophical, about setting the bar high or setting the bar more realistically, and some differing opinions on that, which is an interesting thing to think about. In terms of efficiency, we talked about models existing among other communities that are doing things that may help us model our own specific goals when we get there. And also the idea of net zero becoming, especially in residential area, becoming more achievable. We talked about home size expectations. Maybe if we can get away from the idea of homes being bigger and bigger for the number of people that live in them, it'll be more easy to have an efficient home or a net zero home. We also had goals in the area of fuel switching, and that largely means electrification for facilities. Talked about 10% being very achievable, especially residentially, with air source technology getting better, and we expect that to continue to improve in the future. Although at this point, we have kind of a practical limit around 0 degrees Fahrenheit. So we talked about maybe not saying that 100% electric need be the goal, or there's some technological limitations that may be imposed on that. But the idea that as soon as we can electrify, the better, partly because natural gas is sort of a worse climate influencer than we originally thought, with some of the leakages in the distribution system and things like that. We also touched on ideas of ground source heating and cooling systems being a great technology, especially if they can be applied at a district multi-facility level to make them more economically attractive. We kind of just touched the surface on a lot of the goals that we were looking at, so it was exciting.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was babbling. Excellent. That was a great summary. Thank you very much. Okay, how about the land use and housing team? Who was your team coordinators, and what would you like to share?
So Jackie and I also took the notes for the land use and housing, so I'll kind of just go over what we talked about. As far as the initial goals, once again, we get caught up in some really good conversation, and there's lots of excellent ideas. Everyone felt that the 2% goal was sufficient. There is interest in adding that at least verbiage to our goals, just to have the number as a baseline, but leaving room to increase as we develop strategies that we think would make a higher goal more achievable. As far as the adaptation portion, a lot of strategies, particularly around minimizing impermeable surfaces, increasing green space, adding additional opportunities for transportation equity and housing equity for individuals in the area, and kind of how all of those components are tied together, where if you find solutions for one, those solutions really can be applied to a number of different issues. So, you know, the solutions for flooding might be the same solutions for heat issues in the summer. So how really the interconnectedness of all those solutions are to each of the goals.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Another good summary. Okay, how about the health and safety team? Who was your coordinators and anything you'd like to share?
Well, I figured out how to share the screen, so then I started taking notes. But I think under health and safety, one of the things that seemed to be sort of recurrent in our conversation was the vulnerability of some populations, less economically secure, to experiencing increased risk related to, for example, heat or air quality problems such as ozone, crises, and that the elder population being susceptible to the heat experiences, like we talked about, Ted, that we'll see those wider swings, and to recognize that it's important for us to approach these problems from a communitary perspective or communal perspective. We made a reference to the importance of water quality. Didn't investigate that too much because there was another section that was but that's an important aspect of our health security. And then another issue is when we have the heat crises, it's well recognized that communities have increased risk for violent behavior. And are we ready to make a plan to help our community to be able to get through the stress of these high extreme weather experiences without resorting to the behavior that we've already seen in larger cities when they're heat stressed? And the notion that our young people today have the increased stress of seeing a future related with the issues that we're talking about. And are we taking attention to care for the mental health and security of our young folks? So I think the overarching issue was that we have segments or populations, small populations in our larger population that are particularly vulnerable to these stressors, and that the solutions can be arrived at only through a communal response. Thank you.
Excellent, great. All right, okay, so we're ready for our third and final round of breakouts. One more round here. Same story as this second round. You don't need to talk about the overarching 40% reduction goal, just the sector, potential strategic goals per sector. So we have transportation and mobility, waste management, and local food. Let me just double check the rooms. Okay, so I'm opening up all the rooms. You should, just like before, you should have an opportunity to select your room, and you can let me know if you need any help moving in. All right, so we are almost done. We have 3-4 minutes left. So rather than doing the sort of report back for this group, next meeting we'll have a chance to do that. So I'm going to just go ahead and move into the last item, which is next step discussion. I will send out an email to the team with the next step sort of reminders to try to help make it clear. There's really 2 things for you to do. The first thing to do is, if you have not had a chance to review the baseline document for the 3 teams that you're on, it would be great to review that. And then clearly, if you want to review the other sections, please feel free. If you want to dig into any of the other baseline documents that are summarized in that baseline document, feel free. I'm not discouraging it, but at the very least, if you can make sure you read through the 3 sections for your 3 sub-teams, that would be great. The other thing that I would like for you guys to do between now and our next meeting is to review, excuse me, let me share my screen, the example action screening criteria document. It's linked there on the agenda. And again, I'll send out an email to everybody so you guys can see it. And so what this is as we move forward, as I say, the next meeting, we're going to finish up kind of talking about bigger picture goals for each section. And then the following that, we're going to start exploring kind of best practices, what other communities are doing in related actions, and start to define and explore detailed actions to achieve those goals. And when we're that process is it's a creative process, and what's going to happen is it's going to be a little divergent for a while, where we're going to add to the list, we're going to throw in ideas, we're going to write some of our own ideas, we're going to see things we like, we're going to identify, put stuff on a list, sort of so to speak. And then we'll get to a point where it's like, okay, so we've got our list, now we want to start whittling it down, refining those ideas, simplifying them or honing them in for our community, and then also kind of reviewing them against criteria. How might we choose between one action or another? Or how do we want to make sure that this action is right for our community? And so some of it is, of course, how effective might it be related to GHG reduction or adaptation. But in addition to that, it's also community specific, because an action might be awesome in one community, but frankly not the right fit for another community. Maybe it doesn't meet some of the other goals or the essence of the community. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to review our actions at the right point in time. When we get to that place in time, we're going to review our actions against screening criteria. And so what I would like to do at our next meeting, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select screening criteria. We're going to do that through that little vote, dotmocracy kind of thing. Everybody will get a couple of votes or so many votes, and you can select criteria, and then we'll see what seems to float to the top. And we'll look to select maybe 3 criteria, maybe 4, no more than 5, I suggest. The more you have, it becomes a bigger challenge. It's because you have to review each action against them. So that's kind of a long setup. So we're going to be looking for 3 or 4 criteria, words or ideas against which we will review each action to try to see how we feel like it performs for the community. That also be an opportunity for us to decide how might we make this action better. If we review it against a criteria and it's not really doing so well, maybe we'll see how we could make it better for our community. So we have a starter document, a number of potential selection criteria that you could choose from. These are not the only ideas. You could have your own word, your own thought. And if you do, absolutely, please add it. All you have to do is just go down to the bottom of the list here and add in, your new idea, whatever that is. If you don't see a criteria that you might want to use to review actions against in the list already, if you don't see one, please feel free to add one. Okay. So between now and the next meeting, I'd like you to just take a moment to review the list. If you have one that you'd like to add, feel free to add it. And then at the next meeting, we're going to start off, we're going to do a little dotmocracy, and we will all take a moment. Well, you all will take a moment to select, your top 3 or so. And from that, that'll be in the back of our minds as we create actions. And we'll bring them out towards the end of the process as we really start looking at refining. Okay, so is there any questions about that or frankly, anything that we've had today?
I got a quick question. In the housing side of things, was there a reason why on-site solar was not a benchmark for trying to improve the energy efficiency in the community? One thing with creating electricity off-site is it creates it costs 2.8 more in terms of energy when that electricity is produced off-site currently. So and the primary reason is because the electricity received, that's secondary energy, right? So if we can produce that electricity on site, and I was kind of curious, do these metrics, are they measured in site energy, or are they looking at just the site, or are they including the source energy too?
Well, so there's a couple questions in that. The first question is related to why renewables was not in the housing. And I can say that actually, so the housing is a little bit goofy. So, and we can kind of reconfigure stuff as we move along. But the land use and housing is looking at housing from kind of an adaptation, vulnerability kind of perspective, those kinds of views. In our energy, buildings and energy section, there is, at least the baseline had a potential strategic goal to increase distributed renewable energy from 1% to another. I think it was from whatever, 0.5% to 5% by 2030. Which would include residential or could include residential and commercial, or you guys could define it either way. So the renewable energy portion is actually under discussion in the buildings and energy section. Clearly, there's a little bit of cross training opportunity here too. So as the land use and housing talks about stuff, if renewable is really important to that sector. We'll make sure that that also gets heard by the buildings and energy group. But it is already in discussion. So it is actually in the process. And as far as, so the overall GHG inventory, that's talking about those emissions are source. And we haven't necessarily talked on a per building basis. So all of our conversations here, we can assume that it's source, but whether you describe it as source versus site in any given conversation or specific strategy or action might vary. But in terms of our modeling, we're looking at source emissions.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other questions at all?
I have
I
a
think
question.
Yeah.
Is there some place where, like today, we talked about net zero, for example? Is there some place where we can share documents or reports or studies or information with other members of the team? Like, here's a whole article about doing net zero public housing or whatever. And could you tell me how to do that? Thank you.
That's a great question. And yes, so I'm now looking at our team webpage. And in the email I sent out to everybody, I'll make sure to have the link again in the password. Again, please do not share this with people outside of the team, only because we're going to have access to work in progress documents, and we just don't want the potential for somebody to accidentally mess up the team's work when it's still baking, So that's why this is a team only site. You will see here this upload file. This blue folder is where, as we produce documents, you can download them there. If you have something, like a study of some sort, or some document that you want to share as an actual PDF file, you can upload it here. I'll be notified of it, and then I will add it to CAP team resources, or down here at the bottom, educational content. It kind of depends on what you give me, what it is. But we can definitely add more content. So feel free to send me something if you have it.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome.
there was the source to site information from the EPA portfolio manager. I think I added a link to an email I sent last week if anyone's interested in just understanding the importance of having on-site electricity. And because currently, well, if we wait till 2030 to reduce our renewables, I think we're maybe a little shy of what our potential could be. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Say, one thing I did realize that I should have asked for the teams is for this last round, which is transportation, waste, and local food. Would you guys mind sharing with me who the team coordinators were? For instance, on transportation?
I guess I kind of took the role of coordinator of that.
Okay,
Awesome. Sure.
Thanks, Bob. And then how about—
Sound like a quicker meeting.
Yeah, it went faster. How about on waste management?
Jackie.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. And then local food? Maybe it was a group, kind of a group conversation.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. So I figured out how to do the share screen and took the notes for our group.
Okay.
On, yeah.
Thank you.
Production.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, everybody. It was really an awesome, this is a great team. The conversations that I was hearing were very thoughtful, and also very clear that people are looking to advance the greatest potential for the city, but also trying to understand what are the repercussions. And it's a great dialogue. So thank you very much, everybody. I'll send out a follow-up email on the couple things to do between now and our next meeting, which is March 9th, Wednesday, March 9th. The next workshop, just beware, starts at 3:30 in the afternoon. Okay, so March 9th at 3:30. Again, that'll be in my follow-up email, but that'd be great. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate all of your work, and we'll see you on March 9th.